This week on the Sports Initiative podcast, I sit down with author Brian Rzeppa. He discusses his new book, You're Hired, A Guide to Working in Sports, in which he interviewed a series of athletic directors and general managers from a selection of top schools and professional sports teams. He highlights common threads in organisational hires, how they use search firms in order to find suitable candidates, and hints and tips in order to prepare for interviews. I hope you enjoy. Brian, first of all, thanks for reaching out, and obviously thanks for sending me a copy of your book. I guess first question is, how are you, and how are things over in the States at the moment?
It's going well. Coronavirus unfortunately is picking up quite a bit, especially within the county that I'm in Michigan. But we're kind of just trying to push through with it. I'm sure things are going to change over the course of the next few months. Hopefully, it doesn't get too bad. But overall, just not looking forward to the cold weather, but trying to stay optimistic overall.
Well, you reached out regarding your book and stuff, and as I said, you sent me a copy, which is good. I guess the first question linking into that is, why did you want to write it? What was your reasoning behind wanting to write a book of this sort?
Yeah, so my undergrad degree is in sports management. And so, naturally and just being a sports fan in general, I was just kind of inclined to working in sports myself. And so, as I was going through my undergrad degree and going through my education there, I had worked in minor league baseball for a couple of years. And, just kind of going through that experience myself really opened my eyes to, what working in sports really entails. And I think that from the aspect of someone that wants to work in sports, I think that's kind of who I was writing to in one element, just kind of giving them this background of how to get these top level jobs. And coaches, general managers, athletic directors, uh, you know it's kind of a mysterious process to a lot of people. So just kind of giving some background on that. And then kind of on the other side of it, just I'm sure as a sports fan yourself, just working, looking at social media, things like that. There's after every game or during every game, there's questioning of coaches, questioning of these moves, wondering, how do we get these free agents or this draft pick or however it goes. And so I kind of gave a little bit of insight as far as how that goes, how these, more nitty gritty details go. And then overall, just kind of looked at the day-to-day lives of these top level jobs and kind of just tried to provide a realistic outlook. So really, yeah, just like I said, I mean, having worked in it myself, just trying to give people an adequate, background as far as what the life is actually like. And then again, just a behind the scenes look to an extent.
And then from people that have read it so far and whatnot, how has it been received?
I'm really thankful so far that haven't really gotten any negative feedback. So definitely happy. It's given being a bit of an ego boost, so that's great.
It's good. So, in terms of your kind of insight into the industry, obviously you mentioned that you worked in baseball there. What role did you take up, and what did that look like for you, and how did you get it, I guess?
Yeah. So the more primary role that I had taken on was working in communications. So I was running the social media, things like that, interacting with the media, kind of setting their interviews up, media relations, that kind of thing. Then just kind of the general overall social media communications like that you would find online. And then as well as like the program and things like that too. And more or less that one was pretty straightforward. I'm from like the general area that the team was located in, so it was just a straight up apply, and that actually worked out for me. But um you know overall, I think that kind of experience, it did, I guess, shift my opinions as far as working in sports. And while I someday may work in sports again, at the time it just wasn't a great fit. And I think that a lot of people will find through reading the book that it might not be a good fit for them. The hours are super long. You're working nights, you're working weekends, you're working basically through every single event. You think about going to a baseball game on Memorial Day weekend, and that sounds great to go to, but you're working all those things, while working in sports. But with that being said, I didn't want to write a book to like dissuade people. I kind of just wanted to provide them with a realistic look so that they would know what they're getting into. And I think that I did a pretty good job of that just based on my own experiences and then based on the experiences of all the people that I had spoke to for it.
So what things surprised you when you went into the role?
Yeah, so I think that what you'll find with a lot of jobs in sports is how little your actual role could have to do with sports themselves. So, I was fortunate with working in communications that, I worked heavily with the athletes in one-on-one kind of situations and was able to kind of take in the game as I was, working social media. But for a lot of different roles within sports organizations, it's more or less just normal business roles, but just, I mean, obviously related to a sports organization. An accountant with a baseball team is not really going to be having that first row seat and watching every single game. And, it just kind of stretches beyond like that too. And I think one of the other big things is just, if you're not a fan of sports, you're really going to have you're really going to be tested as far as, do you actually want to be doing this? And even if you are a fan of sports, there's a lot of times where I've come into contact with people who've worked for longer tenures within the industry. And, you just kind of see that they've become a little bit more jaded and pessimistic regarding sports, and they don't really have that passion for it that they once did. So, before you go into it, you just have to make sure that, this is really what you want. And, if you do work a year or two and you realize it's not for you, that's not a problem either. Sometimes it's better to just, turn on a game for 3 hours and that's your involvement in sports. There's nothing wrong with that. So I think, yeah, it's just, you really don't know until you work in it, or not to talk my book up too much. If you read the book, I think that'll help you get a better idea too.
No, I think one of the interesting things about the book that you mentioned is kind of the how encompassing certain roles can be. And as you alluded to there on social media, you think that general managers, for example, have say over absolutely everything. But in the book, one of the things they mention is the fact that the guy wasn't sure about trading Brett Favre. He didn't know if that was a good idea,
Yeah.
but ultimately got persuaded by the coaches that he wasn't going to be right. And then obviously he went on from Atlanta to Green Bay and had a Hall of Fame career. So I think, like you said there, you make assumptions from the outside looking in that maybe aren't necessarily always correct. And I guess from the experiences of people you've talked to, they change from organization to organization as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that that's kind of one of the tougher things to really adapt to once you get into these top level kind of roles is that, regardless of the actual involvement that you have in any particular transaction or, whatever happens on the field, whatever your involvement is, that's definitely what you're going to be judged by. Your wins and losses, you lost this huge trade, you lost this huge game, regardless of your involvement, you're still going to take on that responsibility. And you're going to be judged by people, whether it be in the media, whether it be fans and things like that. You're going to be judged by people that don't have the full information as far as the decisions that you're making. But, you're still going to be judged by them. So it's tough to kind of grapple with, but you do, with that being said, knowing that, you're going to be dealing with criticism within these roles. You just have to make the decision that you feel is best for the organization and, not, I guess, really factor in as many of these outside factors like, fan opinion and things like that. And I mean, obviously fans are super important within sports and, they wouldn't really exist. Sports wouldn't really exist to the extent that they do without fans. It's just, you can't really factor things in like that. And you have to make, again, work with the information that you have and make decisions based off of that rather than opinion.
And has it changed the way that you view sports from the outside? So are you more considered or empathetic when you're looking at coaches or athletic directors or GMs when you're talking to friends and family and whatnot?
Yeah, I would say so. I think that I'm far more forgiving than most people. Like I said, I like to give, I guess, to use the Detroit Lions as an example. With Matt Patricia as the head coach, I think that now I'm starting to reach the end of my line. But I think that it's fair to give head coaches, general managers, give them 3 or 4 years. Obviously, if there's different opportunities, and you realize that even after a year, it's not going to work out, and you have this opportunity to get a better coach or whoever it may be. You need to be able to pull the plug, but I think that a lot of fans are too open and I guess too excited to pull the plug right when things get tough. But I think that's just part of building an organization and building a culture, is that you have to bring in, it takes time to build, especially again, to go back to an organization like the Lions. It's an organization that more or less is not won over the course of 60 years or so. And so to right the wrongs of that is going to take more than a season or two. And so I think that, yeah, I think overall, I would say I would definitely have a much longer leash than most.
I think it is interesting how prolonged success or prolonged failure does affect the fan base, or does affect the perception of a team. So to put it into perspective, I like two teams. Basketball, I like San Antonio Spurs.
There you go.
NFL, I like Miami Dolphins, who are almost the completely opposite end of the spectrum. You've got San Antonio Spurs, who have been prolonged periods under Greg Popovich, really successful and always competitive. You've got the Miami Dolphins, who are completely opposite, who have been pretty much garbage for my entire lifespan. And I think that what I notice when you read forums or you listen to fans is the Dolphins fans will always assume the worst, and the Spurs fans will always assume the best. And I think it is really interesting how fans can either become jaded by the negatives or be positive just because they semi-expect to do well because they always have done.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I would say that, yeah, I think the Dolphins are doing a great job of turning it around now, with Brian Flores. And I think that that goes back again to him building an organizational culture. You look at the roster last year, and they obviously won 5 games, but that was a roster that easily could have gone winless. But, you bring in a guy like Flores that comes from that Patriots mindset. And, he surrounds himself with people that buy into his culture, and you have a guy like leading the team, a team leader like Ryan Fitzpatrick. It's just a great combination. I think that they're building something that's sustainable, and it's exciting to watch.
No, for sure. I think obviously linking back to your book and stuff, you mentioned certain, I guess, job titles and job roles that kind of the UK audience aren't going to be so familiar with. So it's going to be quite challenging, but you take as long as you need to. Can you explain kind of what the collegiate system looks like in the US, and then how that then goes on to pros and stuff, and kind of, I guess, gloss over some of the roles that you mentioned in your book, because it's quite wide ranging, the people you're able to speak to?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I guess the most common path for you go out of high school and then you go to play Division I college athletics, and that's like the top of the top, the elite athletes. That's the most I guess where every athlete is looking to get, even though most athletes do not go on to play Division I. Then there's also Division II, Division III, then like NAIA, things like that. Division II is also pretty exclusive. Division III, you can start getting into. It's still tough to get into, but obviously not at the level of Division I or Division II. So it's pretty much just tiered like that. And then within Division I, there's like the Power Five conferences. So the Big Ten, the SEC, the Pac-12, these home run hitters like the Alabamas, the Floridas, the Michigan, Ohio State, USC, things like that. These are the top colleges athletically speaking. And so within each of these athletic departments are the athletic director, and every college has an athletic director, but to be able to get to the level of like a Florida or a Georgia or something like that, it's extremely extremely difficult. And so then obviously going in from there, you would go from your sport in Division I, and then go professionally to whatever sport it may be. And then running those teams is just generally the general manager. So, they're making decisions on draft day, they're making who to acquire, while also just running the organization as a whole. So as far as, getting into each of those, whether it be an athletic director or a general manager at the professional level, that's really what the book is about. And it's an extremely, extremely difficult process just because of how few of these roles that there are. Obviously Division I has a couple hundred teams, but or a couple hundred organizations that is, and universities. But, there's countless people that are looking to get into these roles. And then you look at the professional landscape and, with the NFL, there's 32 general manager jobs. So, it's an extremely exclusive, extremely exclusive to get into overall.
And so what are the differences between like a D1 and a D2 school? What would the or D3, what would the differences between those schools be?
Yeah, so the D1 is going to be generally like larger schools, so the more like nationally prominently known schools. Division two is a little bit more local. So like Division one would include like University of Michigan, Michigan State University. Division two, then you're dropping into like a Wayne State University, which is like it's a college in Detroit. So you're not really going to have too many people that are coming from like out of state to go to Wayne State. And then Division three, you're getting even more segmented than that. And you're getting into even more regionally or statewide known schools and more private schools, things of that nature. So it really does just come down to size for the most part.
And how does it affect, if we're talking football, for example, and we're looking at Alabama compared to a D2 school, what type of sizes in terms of fan bases and game day crowds, obviously without COVID, what differences are we looking at in attendance and fan bases, etc.?
Yeah, so I guess like the easiest one just in my backyard here is, the University of Michigan. They're at 110,000 people in the stands on game days. Wayne State, man, probably 1,000, 2,000. So it's light years apart, really. D3 is probably closer to D2 or D2 is probably closer to D3 as far as like attendance levels and things like that. But Division one is it's a monster, really. Alabama, they fill the stadiums up 70,000 or so. So, as far as like funding goes, it's again a completely different ballpark. The University of Michigan, their football program is probably what makes the athletic department, in the black every year financially. So they're carrying, these organizations for the most part.
And I'm right in thinking Jim Harbaugh is the coach for Michigan. Is that correct?
He is, at least for the time being, according to some fans.
Okay. Has he not been doing too well of late now?
Yeah, they're 1-2 so far to open this year, and one of those losses was against Michigan State in a very big upset. So a lot of people are not very happy with him.
Okay, so obviously for him, if we look at something like that, he's someone who's come from the NFL, the San Francisco 49ers, and dropped down. And we talk about the budgetary size to attract someone like that. It's obviously going to cost a lot of money for the university to go and pay someone like him, right?
Yeah, and I mean, I think that especially with Jim Harbaugh, he was in a pretty unique situation where, it was kind of surprising to see him fired from San Francisco just because he was so successful there. It's just, I guess, a difference in opinions with ownership. And he went to he attended the University of Michigan previously, so he had a natural like affinity for the school and whatnot. So kind of unique circumstances there. But yeah, I mean, as far as being able to appeal a professional head coach to come down to the college level, it's going to take an unbelievable amount of money. I mean, even Harbaugh, who had the ties to Michigan, he's a top five coach in the country, as far as top five paid coach in the country. And, to get someone of that level you'd have to pay them in the top five, which is, 8, 9, $10 million a year. And, for most athletic departments, that's just not reasonable. And that's why you do see a lot of college coaches try to move up to the next level, which now I guess we're seeing with, Cliff Kingsbury in Arizona.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I liken it. Well, football over here, it would be the equivalent of like Jurgen Klopp or Pep Guardiola jumping down into a different level, which obviously would be really, really strange. When you're looking at those types of we're talking D1 schools and stuff. Can you just talk through what the draft process looks like for them to go from a school to go through draft and how then they end up in the NFL or NBA or MLB or whatever it is?
Yeah, so each league obviously has their own, requirements as to, how long you need to be in school in order to go. I think that with the NFL, you need to be 3 years removed from high school to be able to join the NFL. The NBA is just a year. The MLB is kind of a unique situation where you can leave after high school, but if you go to college instead of leaving right after high school, you would have to be in school for, I believe, 3 years. And then the NHL is a completely different. With junior hockey and whatnot, it's insane to try to track that, but you have people getting taken when they're 17, 18 years old. But as far as, looking at the NFL, you play your 3 years in college or you play your 2 years and have a redshirt year. Um, you go through that and then you go, obviously throughout that entire time, you're being scouted along the way. Scouts are at pretty much every major Division I game. Um, as far as NFL scouts are at these games. And so that process continues on. And, after you finish your year, generally you're going to move into the combine and workout process. So the combine has, the top 150 or so college players. And, you're doing, various drills to show speed, strength, things of that nature. And then you're at the combine, you're also working to meet with teams. And so, going through the interview process and then the NFL has, I believe it's something like 30 workout spots, so you can bring in players for private workouts. Basically, you're really being tested on your athleticism at that point. And it was kind of different this year because you weren't able to have those private in-person workouts, and you did have to rely on the college tape quite a bit more. And so once you get past all of that through that entire offseason, then that's when you get to the draft and then hopefully are picked. But even if you're still not out completely because there's a ton of undrafted free agents that are brought in every year.
I think it's obviously important to say that in these schools and these Division I schools, as you alluded to earlier, a lot of it is down to if you win or if you lose, which can taint or help your record as a player, but also as a coach and stuff and whatnot.
Yeah, and I mean it's really difficult at the college level too because you're not able to go out and sign players or anything like that. You really have to recruit, and you're recruiting not only as athletically, but you have to bring in athletes that are going to be able to get into your school academically, or you're going to have to be able to appeal to them academically or based on location. Does this particular athlete or does this high school student want to spend this next 3 years in Michigan when they could spend it in somewhere warmer like Florida or Georgia or California? So there's so many different elements that go into college coaching, and the X's and O's on the field are one thing, but you do have to be able to compete recruiting wise, and that can be a huge uphill battle, especially for smaller schools. It's tough if you're a local kind of lower ranked university trying to go up against an Ohio State who has the newest weight rooms, this incredible background of a history of winning. And so yeah, it is an incredibly tough gig that goes far beyond just coaching on the field.
And so I guess that's kind of talk through the process of what it looks like to go through from high school. You get recruited into college, you then get drafted into your pro leagues. And then obviously if you're in pro, you hopefully stick around, able to re-sign, etc. I think one of the common themes that I saw running through your book is how challenging it is for coaches, particularly at the college level, whilst they're trying to gain their way to the top job. So do you just want to talk through, I guess, some of the interviews you've had with people and use some of the examples of where essentially had to uproot families multiple times to hopefully get a role that they want and, one that's more financially reasonable, that type of stuff?
Yeah, and that's again one of the things that makes the coaching world so difficult is that it really is just pretty much a year-to-year basis. You never know if your head coach, if you're an assistant, you never know if the head coach is going to be kept on for next year, and if he's not, then you're definitely not going to be for the most part. So it really is kind of, especially at lower level programs, it's just year to year, and you could be going from city to city. One of the people that I had spoken to was he's currently works as a special teams coordinator for Utah State football. And he had previously worked at the South Dakota School of Mines as their head coach. And prior to that, he had worked for probably about 8 to 10 different universities within the course of 10 or 15 years. So, he's married, he has kids. And so to ask a coach or to get a family on board with, not knowing where you're going to be on a year-to-year basis, it's incredibly beyond words how difficult that is. It's stressful, it's taxing. You can't really, your spouse really for the most part cannot get consistent employment because you don't know if you're going to be there next year. And then as far as kids schooling goes, to be moved out of schools and have to make new friends every single year, it's just an incredibly taxing lifestyle. And once you do eventually get into a head coaching role, you do have a little bit more stability and you have more control over your organization. So, you know, maybe you want to have like the family day, like one of the people that I'd mentioned within the book. They have families come in, or they have you leave earlier on a certain day, so you're able to balance that work life a little bit more. But I mean that really is one of the tougher overarching themes, is that to find any semblance of work life balance is a very, very difficult task to achieve. And even though you do have more stability as a head coach, you're being asked to do a lot more too, as far as with your time.
And did any of them discuss how taxing it was on the families? Did any of them go into actually how challenging they found it constantly having to move?
Well, yeah, I mean, just the overarching thing was just a lot of missed birthdays, a lot of missed games, youth games and things like that. And one of the athletic directors that I had spoken to, he had said that he made it a point to take his kids to school every day, and for a lot of times that was the only time that he would see them throughout the day, or even after work he would come home later and they would be asleep. So I mean, it's just, yeah, it's an incredibly difficult sell, especially when you're early in your career within the sports industry and not making much money at all. It's tough to sell an entire family to signing up for that. And you really again need to make sure that this is the priority that you want, and that everyone in your life is on board with it, or else it's just probably never going to work.
I don't know if you've seen it on Netflix. I think it probably was released a little bit earlier for you guys, but Last Chance U.
Yes.
So the one I can't remember the name of the school, but it was I think the second series, with one of the coaches who had his family live in essentially a 2-bed apartment next to like the locker rooms and stuff. And I think that kind of picture puts into perspective exactly what you're saying here, that his family wouldn't be on board with it unless they were really supportive, even though the girls were saying, I don't like it here, I want to go back to California and all that type of stuff.
Yeah, yeah, let alone the fact that they were, moving from California to, I believe, the middle of nowhere, Kansas. That I would have a tough time selling anyone on that. So, I mean, the fact that they are on board with it is just, incredible for them. And I'm sure the coach feels, unbelievably supported, but then at another aspect has to feel a little bit guilty too, that he's taking his family away and putting them in a situation where, um, you know, that's certainly not ideal.
I think one of the other overriding themes that I got from the book, and this kind of goes from a general manager and a athletic director point of view, which in England would be similar to kind of technical directors, if you like, and director of football and whatnot, is how there's no clear path to those roles, how everyone had a very different background. Could you just discuss some of the examples that you've got of that? Because I thought it was fascinating, some of the stories you had of how people kind of navigated themselves to end up in these roles, and they kind of went on completely different paths to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously, kind of some of the more common ways to get into it, you have, your MBAs, so, Masters of Business Administration. That's a pretty common background to have, or, you have former players. But it's really, like you said, it's not really limited to just those people. In the research that I had done, there's athletic directors that had college degrees in like engineering, counseling, political science. I think zoology was one of them. It's just like nowhere would you think that, running a sports organization would fall into, that academic background, but these people made it work. Some of the athletic directors that I had spoken to, some came from ticket sales, things like that, and just kind of worked their way up. Some were former coaches, some were had worked in like sports information, so you're working in communication and things like that. So I think that is one of the more promising things that I had kind of discovered throughout writing it, is that you don't need to have a specific background to get these top jobs, and just because you have a degree in counseling, that um, doesn't rule you out from becoming athletic director. Because I think that what a lot of people kind of overlook and is just that how little of the jobs, like I had mentioned, how little of the jobs have to do with sports themselves. Coaches, even, they're obviously working with the game plan and things like that, but you also have to have the soft skills to be able to work between your coaches, communication, work with your team. And then outside of that, you're working with boosters and fundraisers and things like that, and working within a community. And it's just, there's an endless amount of opportunities, and there's an endless amount of responsibilities that come with each job. And with that, again, it kind of does open the door for people with, I guess, non-traditional backgrounds to break in.
Obviously, we mentioned there that kind of you can divulge in terms of the routes that you go and diversifying that. Was there anything that, from speaking to these people, you saw as a common thread, that actually all of them had this quality, or all of them had this skill that allowed them to do those roles effectively?
Yeah, and I think that the overarching one is you need to be a good communicator. Like I said, there's so many different expectations and so many different areas that you'll be drawn to and will be pulled in different directions. And so you need to set that organizational culture and set that clear communication out, so that the organization keeps running in the direction that you want it to. And so I guess kind of going out from that, that communication base, do need to be a good networker as well. So again, working those ties within the community, working with your fellow athletic directors or general managers, working with your coaches, working with the media. It's just, between the communications and networking, it's just, both are so crucial to be able to not only succeed within the roles, but also to kind of ascend up the ladder too.
And did they give you any really good examples of where they've been really effective in that communication to staff or boosters or anything like that?
Yeah, so I think that a lot of it comes back within your fundraising. So, within clear communication and working with boosters and things like that, you need people to buy into your vision for the organization and for, the university. So, I think that that's probably the most crucial part, really, especially as athletic departments continue to kind of, their budgets continue to kind of dwindle as the years go on. It's even more crucial to be a good fundraiser. And with that, like I said, you have to get people to buy in to your vision for the organization and make them believe that what you're doing is making a positive impact, not only on the students, not only on the teams, but on the university itself.
And were there any creative ways that people did that you came across?
Coming to mind, not right now. I think a lot of it was pretty much just general, like pretty specific stuff. But just looking throughout outside of the book, even there's uh, especially now with COVID, people are having to get more creative, and athletic departments are having to get more creative. You can't really host fundraising events for the most part, so whether it be like online auctions, things like that, just online, you know conversations with fans, just one-on-one, being able to connect athletes and coaches to the fans. People are getting a lot more creative, and just going through these different teams' social media, you can definitely see that there.
For people in these roles, often they go into the role and that they're taking over someone else's work. And one of the things that kind of stood out in the book was a coach, and I want to say it was John Cohen. Now I could be wrong in the person here, but he had gone from being a coach to then going into being an athletic director, and he'd assumed that all the coaches had worked and had done everything the same way that he did. And then he was expecting, when he got to athletic director, it'd be really easy because he'd just have multiples of what he'd done and he'd be able to gather all the information. But when he stepped into that role, he realized that actually everyone did it in their own way. And for him, took a long time to try and kind of understand everyone's processes. Is that something, speaking to those managerial positions, that they found going into someone else's role or getting used to the processes in place were really challenging for them?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think within that kind of transition from coach to athletic director, you go from overseeing one minor aspect of the athletic department to overseeing the entire athletic department. And, a lot of that, just making that transition is going to come down to clear communication, like I said before. Working with your different coaches to kind of come to a conclusion as far as, the different processes that you want them to follow. But you also, on that same aspect, you don't want to micromanage either. So it's really a fine line to walk, and it can take a lot of time to learn. So, it is probably one of the toughest parts of taking on one of those top jobs, and just getting used to those processes, and being able to implement your own, so that again, you implement your own organizational culture. And with John Cohen, he was staying within the same university, so he was part of that culture already. But even while being part of that, he still needs to set in his own processes for doing things if he's going to be an effective leader. And obviously he has been to this point. Mississippi State has been doing quite well, so he has made that transition well. But it's very easy to see where others go wrong.
One of the things you highlight, and this is a real difference, I guess, between the UK and US, is search firms that colleges have to go and find coaches or athletic directors. Can you just talk through that process and some of the experiences that some of the people in this book had?
Yeah, so the search firms are really prominent within like Division I athletics, and even at the professional level as well. So basically, when a coaching job becomes available, whether it be, they fired their previous coach or whatever it may have been, um, you know, basically you're going to hire this search firm, and you're going to work with them to develop a candidate profile. And what that will include is, basically what you're looking for. If you look at football, what kind of offense are you looking to run? What kind of defense are you looking to run? What kind of track record? Do you want a previous head coach? Do you want someone who's only been a coordinator? Do you want, there's a million different characteristics that, they work through, and it's a pretty extensive process. And so after that point, once that kind of candidate profile has been built, the search firm will kind of, work within the organization to get a feel for where their organizational culture is at. You'll work within a community to kind of get a feel for, how everything really stands as a whole. And so once that has kind of been established, the search firm will go out and they'll develop this list of candidates, whether it be a list of 5, 10, 15, whatever it may be. They'll bring that to the hiring committee at the university. And then if they decide to move forward with any of the candidates, they can, it would go just kind of like a normal hiring process from that point. But there's always the chance that they'll just deny all of the options that they've been given, and the search firm will go back out and, work through their catalog even further. So it's really, I mean, a pretty lengthy, extensive process. So when you see these jobs filled within, a week or so, it's pretty rare.
And so, I guess the first question, how prevalent are these search firms across the US? And I guess the next question is, do all colleges at D1 level do this, or is it variant from school to school?
I would say for the most part, most colleges are going to do this for major positions. So, your football coaches, your basketball coaches, things of that nature. You're pretty much going to be looking at that. And as far as at the D1 level, it does kind of vary. All of the top top universities, like largest universities, are more or less going to use a search firm. As you kind of get towards some of the lower level Division I schools that might not have the funding for it, or more maybe more based on like personal connections and things of that nature. You might not see it quite as often, but it's extremely prevalent overall.
And then I guess, and you've linked it to a little bit there, the networking side for coaches out there seems to be something that's of real importance. One, to obviously get a heads up if there are coaching roles that are going to come available or athletic director roles that are going to become available. But I guess two, to have your name in a positive light. I guess from the interviews that you've done, what type of networking stuff did they do to kind of get their name out there?
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of it is just traditional kind of networking, just getting to know people. It's a little bit tougher now, obviously, again with COVID, but going to different conferences and forums and things of that nature, that was, where you meet a lot of these people and develop some of these relationships. And then even beyond that, just kind of working into, mentorship kind of opportunities. That's something that even college students now are able to kind of get started in, and reaching out, whether it be like via LinkedIn or something like that, and just asking to, meet them for a coffee, just learn more about what makes how they got to where they are, things of that nature. Um, Kind of moving forward from there, though, I think that one of the things that separates a lot of, I guess, younger job seekers is that, one of the things that I'd found was that they the people that I had spoken to said that, a lot of the job seekers, they make that initial contact, I guess, as far as a connection, but then they never follow up on it. And, a lot of these people are willing to give their time and give, any expertise or connections that they could, provide, but that follow up is not there. So I think that for people that are looking to break in, you need to make that initial connection, then continue to follow up, even if you don't think that, it's necessarily going to lead to a job or anything like that. It may lead to a different connection. So it's just crucial to be able to look beyond a singular event or a singular connection, and just realize what knowing one person means, that the people that they know as well. And then, that ball kind of keeps rolling there too.
And I assume for this book, you would have had to have done something similar in terms of reaching out to different people that you did or didn't know. How receptive would you say that these college coaches or general managers or athletic directors and stuff are to sitting down having a coffee or sitting down and just spending time to find out about them and what their role entails and all that type of stuff?
Yeah, I mean, with the scope of what this book was looking to cover, I think that people were way more receptive than, if I was trying to write about like the inner workings or do some kind of expose, something like that. But that could, I guess, be perceived negatively upon their organization. But I think that everyone, was just super positive and was honestly excited about it, because they get questions all the time from people that are younger, just kind of wondering what the day-to-day life is like. And just from fans in general, just not really understanding what the day-to-day life is like. So, from my aspect, it was extremely positive. So that was great.
And was there any further connections and stuff that you made off the back of this that you think will support you moving forward, be it if you want to work in sports or not work in sports?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, I did make quite a few positive connections, and, people that I've continued to talk to this day. So, if I do ever decide to, work in sports again myself, I think that that's only going to benefit me. So, it's the same thing though, is that, if I did just make that initial contact and never and had interviewed them once or twice and just never spoke to them again, it would have been a lost connection and a lost opportunity. But like I said, you do have to work that follow up and, keep with it. That's how relationships are built.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I saw someone talking about the late Kobe Bryant, and they were saying they didn't realize actually on his phone the number of people he just checked in on from week to week. And apparently it was extensive, where he just dropped them a text to say, how are you doing? You okay? Or I think there was a case of his daughter played basketball against a team once, and the coach had asked him a question for a little bit of help, and he would text the coach every now and again to see how they're getting on with their fundraising or whatever that be. And I think, as you said there, that constant connection with people is the crucial bit to networking and having longevity of the network as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, even beyond that, just, it shows that you're a caring person too. And I think that that can go a long way as well. If you do, like follow up like Kobe Bryant, like in that situation, it just shows that you weren't just interested in only what they could do for you, but you're interested in them as a person. And, with sports being such a relationship based business, anything that you can do to really show and to really prove that you do actually care about people more than what they can do for you, it's going to be the more that you can show that, the better. And that again, it's just even a minor thing like that, or a handwritten thank you note. It's just overall not going to be a huge effort on your part, but it goes a long way in achieving what you want to achieve.
And I think one of the things you discussed, obviously, with the people going into these roles and whatnot, was the prep work that went into the interviews, and the wide scope of interviews. It seemed crazy how different some of them were, from almost 4 interviews from one individual to almost like a sit down coffee, you've got the job type of deal for others. Can you just talk through, I guess, the experiences of the people in your book that they had with these interviews, and also kind of the extensive prep work that would go into it?
Yeah, so I guess on a coaching side, basically what you're going to be wanting to do throughout your coaching career is just continue to build your coaching portfolio, and quite literally a portfolio. You're going to want to detail, what you're looking to do on the field. So, laying out your general strategy, your practice schedule, things of that nature, and continuing to update that as time goes on. But then beyond that, you're going to want to outline, your general values and your vision for a particular organization. And so that's going to vary from organization to organization, based on, what role you'd be taking on, but as far as the vision goes. But
Did you see any of these portfolios?
say that again, I'm sorry.
Did you see any of these portfolios like firsthand? Did they show you any?
Not with these coaches, no, unfortunately. But yeah, that they're also, that's another thing that you could also find as a resource, throughout the internet. But yeah, and I did include at the end of the book more of in the appendix, kind of just a general overview of what I guess a portfolio would look like too. So again, that's what it comes down to: how you deal with different situations. It's a lot of work, but it's definitely worth it in the end, I guess. And then as far as general managers go and athletic directors go, just because you're doing so much more than sports, you're working with sales, you're working with fundraising, you're working with event management, facilities management, things of that nature. You have to be prepared to answer questions from any number of different people. And I think that, again, Stacy Collins within the book, he spoke to a number of different people, and it went on for hours and hours, and he met with different committees that he had to be prepared to answer. And especially when you're looking at college athletics, you're going to have to answer questions about academics as well. So, you, especially within athletic directors and general managers, you have to be prepared for more or less anything. And that comes back down to your network as well. So one of the people that I had spoken to, he did not have a lot of experience within the conference that he was interviewing within. So he reached out to different athletic directors that he knew within that conference, and got some insight about the school from them. And then to go even a step further, you have to be ready to know who you're interviewing with as well. Because like I said, with it being a relationship-based business, just knowing who you're interviewing with and being able to develop that connection with them right off the bat is going to be crucial in getting you kind of to that next step of the interview and kind of breaking the ice there.
So when they spoke about those individuals, what was some of the common themes? Because like you said, I found this bit fascinating when they were saying how much they catered to the individuals who were interviewing them.
Yeah, so it really does just come down to, developing a personal connection with them. So, maybe you shared the same alma mater, maybe you went to the same university. Maybe you had previously worked in one of the same places, not at the same time, but just in that same organization. So just really anything that you can do to develop that kind of bond right off the bat is going to be huge. And then to go beyond that, and this is where your connections would come in, would be, learning about what that person values within a leader of their organization, what that overall university values, and just seeing if, if that's you, you need to figure out how to sell that, sell yourself as that person. But if that's not you, maybe it's not the right, maybe it's not the right opportunity for you. And knowing that right off the bat would be crucial for both sides and important for both sides.
I think, yeah, and one of the things you mentioned kind of towards the end is, as like a bit of advice, is be genuine. You said you've got to be genuine in those circumstances. Don't lie because you want the job, or don't lie because it, comes back to bite you later down the line.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things, I mean, just as far as being genuine goes, is that again, that comes down to communication too. You need to be trusted, and regardless, though, if you're looking at football and if you're an offensive minded coach that you come in with the strong opinions as far as the type of offense that you want to run, but the people interviewing you say they want to run this particular offense, and then you just lie and say, oh yeah, that would be fine with me. Regardless, you're going to be judged upon what you agreed to, and you're going to be judged upon, something that you may not be comfortable with. So just being genuine right off the bat is just going to lead to, again, more realistic results, and results that you will know were accomplished based on you doing everything you could, rather than doing everything you said that you wanted to do, when that may not have been true.
One of the best anecdotes I liked about this regarding the catering your interview to the interviewer was the Al Davis story that you mentioned in there. Could you just talk through that for the audience, because I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, so Ken Herrick had definitely interviewed with, or had worked with the Raiders for years, and so Al Davis was obviously known as one of the, how should I say, one of the more hands-on owners in the league. So I think that everyone kind of went into those interviews knowing that you're going to go through a different interview process, and Ken was prepared for that to an extent, but he definitely more than a few people were definitely tripped up by Al Davis, and yeah, I definitely would recommend anyone liking to learn about the Raiders to read that story.
Yeah, no, it definitely is interesting the way that you have to cater to his outlook, and how he'd quiz you on your philosophies, which is particularly interesting. I guess for you, as an overriding thing, without giving too much away, because obviously I want people to read it, what were your main takeaways, that if you wanted to get into these advanced roles, or you wanted to progress in this thing, that you should look to do to best prepare yourself for it?
Yeah, I mean, right out of the gate is just networking. That's going to be far and away the most important thing. It's like I said, it's largely a relationship-based business. So it's not, I would not like to go back on the cliche of saying, it's not about who you know, or it's not about what you know, it's about who you know. Because you also, I mean, you need to know so much information to be able to run these different organizations. These are $100 million, $1 billion organizations. So you do need to know your stuff. But again, it does come down to a lot of those connections, and being able to make those connections is a huge deal. Beyond that, though, I think one of the more important things is that you do need to have a passion for sports, and just you need to be ready for that passion to be tested at a number of different times. Like I said, with social media existing, you can be sitting there at a game at 12 o'clock or 12 midnight on a Saturday night. You see your friends are all out and all that, and then you're at the game for the 10th day in a row, or you're at the ballpark for the 10th day in a row. So you just, again, you need to be ready for all the expectations that are going to be asked of you, and your passion for sports is definitely gonna be tested. But with that being said, it can be incredibly rewarding, and a lot of the highs are, not really comparable to anywhere else you would find. So, like I said, that's probably gonna be the most crucial thing is that, networking, and then again, just being passionate about sports.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And one character, and I want to leave this towards the end because I thought it was interesting, and I can't remember the gentleman's name, which I feel a bit bad for, but was the former NBA player.
Yeah, Lance Blanks.
Yeah. Can you just talk through his journey and his experiences? Because I think, particularly in England at the moment, there's a real push for former players to kind of get into coaching and whatnot. And there's always discussions around using the experiences they've had compared to maybe they haven't had so many experiences in a coaching pedagogy type environment or a recruitment type environment or anything like that. So can you just talk through his journey? Because I thought that was quite interesting, kind of all the stops he had on his journey.
Yeah, so luckily I was fortunate enough to speak to a couple of different NBA players. Lance Blanks, who he was a former first round pick of the Detroit Pistons. He had gone from his coaching career and then began working in the San Antonio Spurs organization, where he's working in scouting. So, that's a pretty direct, pretty direct. You can, having played yourself, you're involved within constant film breakdowns and things of that nature. So, scouting is a pretty natural path for a lot of former players to follow. And then he eventually, worked his way into assistant general manager and then a general manager. So, just kind of increasingly growing roles. But as far as Lindsey Hunter goes, who had a 18 or 20-year NBA career, he had went on the coaching side, and that can be many times a tougher thing to break into, especially with elite level athletes. A lot of times it can be tough to explain and to coach, what you did on the court, because a lot of times it just came natural. So, it's can be tough to translate a lot of those, skills that you performed into to showing someone else how to do them. But like him himself, he was an assistant coach in the NBA. And then was an interim coach in the NBA as well. But even him, if you're out of basketball for even a year, it can be tough to get back in. And, him having coached and having played at the top level, he has had to go to a lower level Division I school that's more local to him. And so, he's going to be in the process of building that program back up, and we'll see how he can go about it. But it's a very tough industry, and Lindsey Hunter, I think, pretty much displays that. He's had an interesting ride to get to where he's at, and I guess having the connection with him now, I guess I'm definitely rooting for him.
I think one of the interesting thing about both of them as well is they mentioned how they'd been in a kind of good, stable organizations, and then at different points ended up going to ones that maybe were slightly more dysfunctional, and saying how challenging that was for them. Do you want to talk through their experiences like that? I particularly like the one where, and I think this was Lance, but I could be wrong, where he had to almost upskill his boss, and he was having to kind of tell him the roles that should and shouldn't be happening and whatnot.
Yeah, and I mean that's just pretty illuminating as far as how that entire process goes. And like we had mentioned at the start of the conversation, the difference between a good organization and a bad organization. I'm sure it was jarring for Lance Blanks to go through that, going from San Antonio and then eventually getting to Phoenix, and just seeing how things are kind of chaotic, and it doesn't necessarily seem like there's one direction that the organization wants to go in, and things are being pulled all over the place. So, it's tough to be able to evaluate that, but that's one of the things that you need to do kind of going into these interviews is, it's very, very tough to be able to pass up an interview to be a general manager. But because there's only, 30 of them in the NBA. But if you find yourself in a scenario that does have this poor organizational culture and, is kind of chaotic, it could be your last chance to ever work as a GM. So you really need to be selective, with those opportunities, and be ready to pass if that's the opportunity, or if it's not going to be the right opportunity for you. And just kind of looking at Lance Blanks, obviously that did not go very well in Phoenix. And, maybe if he had stuck around in Cleveland or stuck around in San Antonio for a couple more years, he might have found himself in a better situation and, might still be, holding down that role now.
And did he mention any particular tells of how you'd be able to highlight maybe a little bit from the outside or going into those interview processes that the organizations may be a little bit chaotic or might have some issues?
Yeah, so I think that a lot of it's going to come down to, when you're in the interview process, and even just from an outsider's perspective, working with working your network again, you know, speaking to people that have been within the organization over the years, that's going to be a factor. But then when you're in the interview itself, is you need to be interviewing them too. If they're not answering your questions directly, or they're being vague, or whatever it may be, you need to take that into account and realize that if they're not being trustworthy and they're not being straightforward now, I mean, can you really expect that to happen as you're actually hired and a member of that organization? So it's just an entire process that needs to be kind of factored in.
I guess the last statement I'll make before I ask you final question and let you shoot off was the idea of one of the people in the book was talking about these interview processes and how at times they can be very stressful, and they can be, as you said, some of them were 4 interviews long, some of them were hours long, some of them were shorter. And what he realized after going through a few of them is you'll always make mistakes in the interviews, but it's how you deal with the mistakes as you're making them that can be a really good tell. If you're being, from the interviewer's point of view, they can tell you made a mistake, but seeing how you deal with it is actually quite a big proportion of whether they're willing to hire you or not.
Yeah, and I mean, like we've kind of talked about, is that, with the interviews being how extensive they are, it's really impossible to know everything. And there's no one that has the answer to every question that's out there. So I guess kind of just being able to roll with the punches and, just admitting, like, if you don't know something, if you're not completely educated on it, just, say that, that will be an area of focus as you kind of move within the role. That'll be an area of focus where you're going to commit yourself to learn more about it. But not getting trapped within, oh boy, I didn't know this particular thing, and letting that kind of snowball into future answers, letting it be its own thing, and letting it be its own growing point, rather than, again, letting it affect the rest of the interview, is definitely a big thing.
Yeah, it was good, and I think that's something that everyone can definitely take away, because we all have those interviews where you I wish I hadn't said that, but it's kind of one of those things. So I guess the question is, what's the plan for you now? Obviously you've done a little bit kind of in pro sports, you're doing a little bit in terms of writing and stuff now. What's your plan moving forward?
Yeah, so I've got, I guess in the immediate future here, I'll have a second book coming out next year. This one, it's still related to sports, a little bit different. It's called The Outliers: Being a Cultural Anomaly in Sports. So for that one, I spoke to around 40 or so athletes that come from non-traditional backgrounds. So, African-American hockey players, Asian-American football players, things of that nature. Just kind of learning about the challenges that they overcame, and, the different struggles that they dealt with being underrepresented, and then kind of exploring, why that is the case, that certain people of certain backgrounds are underrepresented within sports or positions. And then to conclude it is kind of like how we can kind of move forward to make sports more inclusive. So I have definitely kept myself busy.
And then I guess, because we haven't touched on this, where can people find your current book and the title of your current book? Because I didn't actually introduce that at the start.
Yeah, no problem. So it's just really any major book retailer, the Barnes and Nobles, but I think the most common one that people have bought it from is Amazon. So, just going on Amazon, searching "You're Hired: A Guide to Working in Sports," that should get you there.
Perfect. And I guess last question before I let you go, which is, who's the, I guess, most impressive coach or scout or athletic director or GM that you've spoken to, and why?
Yeah, I would think that, off the top of my head here, looking at who I'd spoken to for the book, obviously, Phil Fulmer really stands out. He is currently the athletic director at the University of Tennessee. He's been there in that role for quite some time, but he was also a longtime head coach of the University of Tennessee, and then had also played for the University of Tennessee for college football. So, just to kind of be able to speak with him, he has decades and decades of experience within sports at a level that most people do not, having played it, having coached it, having, been an administrator and being an administrator. Just being able to talk to him was just incredibly enlightening and really kind of expanded my perception of college sports and I guess sports as a whole.
And I guess made you root for Tennessee a little bit as well, right?
Yeah, a little bit.
But listen, Brian, I really appreciate your time, and obviously, thanks very much for my virtual copy of the book. It was a really interesting read, and I'd recommend to anyone listening to go and have a look, because it definitely has some interesting bits. Be it if you're in a management role trying to hire someone, or equally if you're kind of out there at the moment looking to try and find some work, which I think everyone's trying to do.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I appreciate you having me on. And for anyone that is listening and has any questions about working in sports, writing the book, getting publishing a book, things of that nature, any question you have, just send me a tweet, and I'm sure to respond.
Perfect. Listen, Brian, appreciate your time, and I'll catch up with you soon.
All right, that sounds great. I appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to the Sports Initiative podcast with me, Michael Wright. Please remember to follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at the Sports Initiative Podcast, and share this podcast with friends and family. I'll see you next week.